today, or maybe it was yesterday, a tweet from Elon Musk, but you don't see this because you're thankfully not on there. And the tweet was, Sam Harris hates free speech. The
Right. He did
richest
that
man
today?
in the world is
Right.
attacking you
Right. Yeah.
routinely. The man who
Yeah.
has not the levers of power, but almost, I mean, he's obviously stepped away from the White House, but wildly influential, but he can walk by any person on the planet and he's richer than them. And he is regularly denouncing you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, this is what's so awful about this ethically, because in Elon's case, I mean, I know how deep the rot runs because since I left, again, it's about 2.5 years, I have communicated with him exactly twice by email. And both times it was to point out that some right-wing lunatic was manipulating him by taking a clip from my podcast or some other podcast in a very misleading way, making it seem like I believe, the opposite of what I in fact believe. And he was noticing it and reacting to it because, he's the busiest man in the world. He doesn't have time to see what I was actually saying in context. So, he exports this thing to tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people. And on 2 occasions, I've just given him all the receipts. I've just said, Elon, look, you're being manipulated by, in some cases, one of the morons who gave us Pizzagate. In other cases, it's somebody of equal moral stature. And I point out, listen, you're in context. I'm saying the opposite of what you think I'm saying here. Why are you doing this? Why aren't you, why are you engaging with this person? Why are you defaming a former friend? And I know, and it's in certain cases, I've enlisted the closest people to him in his life, right? His best friends and his brother, on that email chain. And in at least one case, the most recent case, one of his best friends chimed in and said, Elon, that's I heard the podcast. It's absolutely not what was said in context, right? So
Yeah.
he's got testimony from someone who he still counts as a good friend. And his response to this personally is go fuck yourself, right? So he's got zero compunction around
Like that was the
making.
actual response.
The actual response was go fuck yourself, do your rebuttals on X, you fucking tool, go fuck yourself.
So you were just
Number
compacting it a
1,
little
2, and
bit,
3,
for our sake.
right?
Yeah.
I love the self-serving do all of this on X to amplify the awfulness of this digital sewer I preside over. But in any case, he's behaving like a sociopath. He knows he's lying. He knows he's spreading errors. He knows I'm not against free speech. We can talk about my position on free speech. For some reason, it's so paradoxical that many people don't understand it. But it seems quite straightforward to me. But Elon, he knows he's lying. He knows he's spreading misinformation, and that's what he's been led to based on, perhaps other personality quirks I wasn't aware of. But, above all, I think it's his addiction to and his derangement by this platform.
What is it that, the platform can derange people? And it's hard to tell why. I mean, I understand certain people who desire money, power, the audience capture is very, very real. And I know certain people, the question of Tucker Carlson, how much does he believe this? Because it's so hard to imagine the man who was a very good magazine writer, a very good profile writer. I mean, just generally a smart and nice guy has turned into something rather different. Elon doesn't need money, right? He doesn't need power.
No.
He has endless, strands of power that he can exercise at any time. And then you think that this is a smart guy. I've only interacted with him very briefly once. We were on Bill Maher on the same show. He was the lead interview, and it was very awkward and strange. And he said at that point, I'm a free speech absolutist, which I've seen some evidence that maybe that's not true since.
Yeah, you think?
But the guy he's a brilliant guy. He's obviously a smart guy. And he's retweeting Pizzagate stuff and stuff that is so easily checkable and falsifiable. Why does that happen to a person like that? And I ask you in particular because I know you've thought about this stuff and you're also friends with him and you can give some insight to the personality that actually falls for this stuff, which is way too easy for a smart person to fall for. So there must be something else at work.
I really just don't know. I have to declare some kind of epistemological bankruptcy here. I mean, I either he has changed a lot, or I never really knew him to the degree that I thought I did. I mean, he was more than an acquaintance. He actually was a friend. Um, but yes, he doesn't need money. He doesn't need anything, but he seems to need attention of a certain kind. And he's getting that he's been getting that for many years from, I mean, I think he bought the platform because he was so addicted to it, and he was so, red pilled or black pilled by his engagement with the algorithm, and his desire to steer it, and his desire to turn it into a digital sandbox for himself. Um, Listen, I mean, there's no one is a free speech absolutist. I mean, let's talk about free speech for a second, because I think it's important that it's confusing, and the fact that the most famous man on earth, or the second most famous man on earth, is telling the world that I'm against free speech as of this hour. It's probably worth commenting on. I think we're very, very lucky to have the First Amendment in America. I think the abridgments of free speech that we're seeing in Western Europe are shocking and totally unproductive. I don't think there should be laws against Holocaust denial. I don't think David Irving should have been thrown in prison for creating a pseudo history of the Holocaust. I think we have the laws right in America, and I think other open societies should emulate us in having something like a commitment to virtual free speech absolutism at the level of what a person has the political and civil rights to do. But no one is a free speech absolutist with respect to their businesses, their platforms, their publishing, their podcasts. Everyone is in the curation business. Everyone has to make editorial decisions. Even 4chan has a moderation policy. I mean, 4chan is just about as vile a place on the internet as you can find. They still don't allow everything, right? You can get kicked off 4chan, you can get moderated, you can get your post taken down, right? And Elon is nowhere near being a free speech absolutist. In fact, he's quite biased. He deplatforms people he doesn't like. He amplifies idiots he does like for some reason. He tunes the algorithm to boost himself preferentially. He capitulates to the authoritarian rulings of other countries that he wants to function in, and he silences dissidents. And I think he even I think there's some evidence of him giving data to authoritarian regimes that have resulted in the arrest of people on Twitter, right? So this guy's not a free speech absolutist. He's, if anything, a hypocrite if he actually had principles he was trying to live by there. But no one can be a free speech absolutist. I mean, you would have, these would not be businesses that could be run. I mean, you certainly couldn't place ads against the awfulness that would result if you had no moderation policy on any of these social media platforms. And so it is with podcasts. I mean, I think Joe Rogan and other podcasters should be free to talk to anyone they want. I'm not begrudging them the conversations. What I'm begrudging them is the fact that, as your platform grows and you start to reach tens of millions of people, if your only contribution to dissecting the ethics of the war in Gaza or the war in Ukraine is to have comedians and self-taught historians on to spread misinformation, and you haven't done any homework, so you're not even alert to the fact that they are spreading misinformation, and in the case of some people recycling the pseudo history of someone like David Irving, you're just misleading tens of millions of people at a stretch, and it's irresponsible, and it has social consequences. And in the context of the greatest eruption of anti-Semitism any of us have experienced in our lifetime, it's deeply destructive. And so that's just has to be pointed out. It has nothing to do with the First Amendment. Of course, you have the First Amendment right to do this, as I think you should have, but others have the First Amendment right to criticize you for it.
What is that responsibility? I mean, I hear that phrase a lot. I mean, you are Joe Rogan, you've got $100 million contract from Spotify. I mean, and when he came over to Spotify, he was forced to purge a bunch of episodes with people that were undesirable. Gavin McGinnis and people like this. There's probably 10 or 15 of them, maybe even more, that they just got rid of. And now he has his show there. He has a responsibility to an audience of 20, 30, who knows? It's the biggest podcast in America. But when he's talking about World War II, and having a guy like Daryl Cooper on, who, as you point out, is just using warmed over David Irving, which, by the way, I had pointed out a long time ago, and my pal on Twitter and pal in real life, Noam Dorman, also pointed it out. And now he's just quite open about it and says, Hitler's War, David Irving's 1977 book, which became actually a Holocaust denial book, and its second printing in, I think, 1990. But this is the guy who's on. He's just some random guy. But the response from these people is like, look, you're experts. Look what experts have gotten us. Experts got us into X, Y, and Z. COVID, you can name it. DEI, they can bring up anything. Yeah. And what is, this kind of scorn for expertise, which I saw recently after a Joe Rogan episode, really exploding online. Oh, the experts and traveling to Gaza, that makes you an expert. I mean, it's been a very, very sort of knuckle dragging argument. People aren't actually addressing the issues at hand. But when you are Joe Rogan and you have a responsibility, what does that mean? Can you have that guy on and not have Andrew Roberts, a specialist in Churchill, or a Holocaust scholar, to come on and actually give the real story?
Well, I don't think you should. I mean, again, the problem is that Joe, because he isn't really a student of this topic, he doesn't know that he's in the presence of a non-expert. I mean, he knows by virtue of a lack of credential, this person doesn't have the standard biography, so as to give them their expertise. But he's being treated like an expert. I mean, Joe is a huge fan of Daryl's podcast. Daryl will go on for tens of hours on these topics. And he's a very talented podcaster.
Yeah.
No one. This is genuinely confusing to people because the people who are criticizing Joe now for having non-experts on and listening to them at length and not rebutting them with real expertise are not arguing for mere credentialism. It's not just that you need a PhD in the discipline and that's the answer. In fact, Joe's had many people with the right credentials on his podcast who are just kooks and crackpots and lunatics on their various topics. He certainly did this with COVID, right? He had some real doctors on. No one can challenge their CVs, but you have 10 minutes of listening to these guys talk, and you can
Robert
see
Malone's,
they have a screw loose.
Whoever these people
yeah,
are, right? Malone,
yeah. I mean, this guy. Well, when the guy tells you that he's been denied a Nobel Prize, right? You're in the presence of at least a personality disorder, right? I mean, this is just not the way credible intellectuals have conversations. I mean, Joe has a taste for conspiracy theories. He has a taste for the contrarian take. The real answer is rather often boring, and the answer involving the CIA doing something covertly is more. And so he has someone like RFK Jr. on to talk about everything under the sun. And yeah, but you listen to RFK Jr. talk, and the crankishness just comes out of his pores. I mean, the guy he's certain that the CIA killed his father and his uncle, right? I mean, let's start there. He's living in a country. He's now running the health infrastructure for a country that he thinks murdered some of his closest family members very publicly, and they got away with it. You get him talking about vaccines or really anything relevant to public health, and you don't have to wait long before the lies and the confabulations and the half-truths come tumbling out. But Joe is not, on the other side of that table, Joe is not debunking any of it, right? He's just swallowing it. And it's important to point out that on a topic that he knows something about, that he has deep convictions on, he would never do that. If he has someone across the table from him who's not making sense about mixed martial arts, he destroys that person, right? He might do it nicely, but he's got no patience for it. It's just, if you utter a few sentences that make it clear that you don't know what a triangle choke is, well, then you've lost all your credibility instantly. It's a recoverable error, and the conversation is put on a very different footing. That's what should happen when you're talking about the Holocaust and you divulge this piece of inside knowledge, wherein the Nazis never intended to kill the Jews. It's actually was an act of compassion. They just realized that once they'd rounded them all up in concentration camps, they didn't have the infrastructure to feed them.
Yeah.
And might it not be more compassionate to euthanize them all with gas? Yeah, how did that happen? What a strange
But
wrinkle
how
in
did that
German
happen?
history there.